Ursula Mindermann, The Ongoing Nakba, a talk for the Network of Photographers for Palestine in April 2023. Shatila, The Ongoing Nakba, 75 years Nakba. My name is Ursula Mindermann. I'm entrepreneur, engineer of optometrical science, photographer and local politician in Germany. I'm one of the vice presidents of the German-Palestine Society and member of the board of trustees, the Network of Photographers for Palestine. I run a project in Bethlehem, a shop behind the wall, and a project in Shatila. You can see me here in the project, you can see me in the refugee camp, and you can see me with Haitham Khatib, who taught me, for a people whose history has been negated, images are the only proof. So I took my cameras and went about 20 times to Palestine and until now 2 times to Lebanon, to the refugee camps where the Palestinians live. I give exhibitions and talk. Here you can see my website, um-foto.art. Now we will talk about Shatila. At first I will introduce some voices of Palestinians. Then we will talk about the Palestinian Diaspora, about refugee camps in Lebanon, what it means living in a refugee camp. Then we do a Shatila walk around, and I will introduce the people who survived the Nakba 75 years ago. Voices of Palestinians in several countries. In Germany. Germany is not an immigration country. Problems, especially for young people from Palestine. Why don't we talk about this in Germany as well, like we talk about the Shoah? Why don't we talk about the Nakba, just about the Shoah? Is it the historical responsibility of the German people? Why are they not responsible for us, the Palestinian people, as well? Are they afraid of allegations of anti-Semitism? Scotland. Proud of this new home openness to the BDS. And is there a historical responsibility because of Lord Balfour? Lebanon. The refugee camps are not a home. We are longing for Palestine. The Palestinian Diaspora. According to United Nations estimates, around 774,000 Palestinians were displaced or forced to flee during the Nakba 1948. Refugee movements to the West Bank were to the West Bank, to the Gaza Strip, to Jordan, Syria and Lebanon. Around 48,000 people are displaced in the new Israel territory. They changed their place in Israel. In 2020 have been there about 5.7 million registered Palestinians. Worldwide, you will find about 12.7 million people coming from Palestine. That was in 2016. 42% of Palestinians have the UNRWA refugee status. With around 80,000 people, Germany has the largest Palestinian diaspora in Europe. In Gaza Strip are living about 1.4 million Palestinian people because they can't leave it. The West Bank about 87,000 people. Syria have been 568,000 people. In Lebanon 479,000 people. These are the sources from 2020. Palestinian refugee camps in Lebanon. From Israel were coming about 100,000 refugees. Most of them come from the northern area of Israel, from Akka, from Haifa. In 2020 were about 480,000 refugees in Lebanon. 56% of them are living in refugee camps. There are 12 refugee camps in Lebanon. In the south you have El Bus, Burich, Shelmali and Rashidi. A little bit more in the northern area of Yemeni, in Ain el-Hurey. It's the biggest one, about nearly 60,000 people are living there. If we come to Beirut, you will find Dabeya, Ma Elias, Shatila, where we will talk about, and Bourij el-Barani. In Wavell are living about 9,460 people, nearly close to Tripolis. In Bedawi are living 21,000 people. In Nar el-Barid, close to the border to Syria, about 5,800 people. What does it mean, living in a refugee camp? If you live in a refugee camp, you don't have a Lebanese citizenship, so you don't even have a right to vote. You are restricted freedom of movement outside the camp. You are not allowed to build a house or to live outside the camps. 2005 permit to work in some jobs, so you are allowed to work as a carpenter in trade, in craft, or in care, but you are not allowed to work like architect, lawyer, teacher, or medicine, for example. You get a bad payment, you get less money for the same work than a Lebanese worker. And properties outside of the camp are not allowed. And properties older than 2001 may not be inherited, they go to the government if the owner dies. You are not allowed to visit public school, and you have a restricted health care. And of course you have no privacy. You can see it here, narrow street, you can see into the windows. It's very narrow, there's not really light, and it's very close. You can hear everything, you can see everything, and of course you can smell everything. The conditions have intensified since 2014 due to the high number of refugees from the Syrian civil war. For example, the number of people living in Shatila can only be estimated. The numbers vary between 22,000 and 40,000 living in only 1 square kilometer. Many of the refugees are living illegal in the camp, so they are not registered. Shatila walk around. You can see narrow streets and cable roofs. The streets are very narrow, and here you have all the cable roofs. It's famous in Shatila. I will talk about water and electricity. No sunlight, no green, high humidity, salty air. Living in Shatila, I will talk about the children and what it means to work in Shatila. And then I introduce the people who live here and who survived the Nakba. Then we can talk about the future. Shatila is a Palestinian refugee camp located in the southern suburbs of Beirut, Lebanon. The camp was established in 1949 following the establishment of the State of Israel and the subsequent displacement of thousands of Palestinians who were forced to flee their homes. Here you can see Shatila, here is Beirut, the coast, here is the airport in the south. Here is the center with the AUB, the American University Beirut. Here is the area where the tourists are, the restaurants. And here you can find Shatila. It was established 1949 for about 900 people. Right now there must be 12,000 and 20,000, nobody knows exactly. The people are living in the third generation in the camp because they are not allowed to leave the camp, and the first refugees came in 1949. So they lived with their children and their grandchildren in the camp. 1982 was a massacre. This is a tragic history. It's one of the most notorious events occurring in September 1982. when it was the site of the massacre carried out by the Lebanese Christian militaries with the complicity of the Israeli military, which had invaded Lebanon earlier that year. During the massacre, between 800 and 3,500 Palestinian refugees were killed, many of them women and children. Shatila has the highest rate of people living on 1 square kilometer. The UNRWA gets about $1 billion each year. They are responsible for education, for school, and for health in the refugee camps. In Shatila, you have 1 health center and 2 primary schools. The unemployment rate is very high, so there's a high criminal rate, and the drug abuse is a big problem in this camp. Shatila remains today a symbol of the ongoing struggle of the Palestinian people for justice and homeland. Some impressions of Shatila. You can see the narrow streets, the flags of the Fatah. They have a connection to Palestine, but the Palestinian Authority, they have own problems and they don't matter about the situation in the refugee camp. Here you can see a narrow street as well, a picture of the Dome of the Rock. The people from Lebanon are living in the refugee camp are not allowed to go to Jerusalem to pray. Nearly 90% of the refugees are Muslims, nearly 10% are Christians. The narrow streets, here you can see it. 5 floors. It was established just with 1 floor, and then they built 1 floor on the other, so they have about 5 floors. And cars and motor rollers are riding through the narrow streets as well, so it's always very noisy, very busy. Living in Shatila. No sunlight, no building permit outside the camp. As I mentioned, they are not allowed to live outside the camp. The homes were raised to 5 floors. You can see it here, the first floor and so on. There is no daylight. The humidity is very high. There are many sick people in the lower floor because it's always wet. And yes, you don't have light. The stairs are very narrow. Often they don't have a railing or light. If you go down 5 floors on the narrow stairs, you can't see where you walk. The laundry is hanging between the houses. If something falls down, it is lost, because it will fall onto the cables. Water and drainage in Shatila is not guaranteed. Water remains in the narrow lanes between the houses, especially in winter. Drinking water is often infected with bacteria and is taken by many people from public taps. You can see it here. The young boy is working here as a public tap, and this woman is taking water from the public tap as well. Electricity. Distribution boxes and cables. Just a few junction boxes provide the whole camp with electricity. The huge increase of refugees have resulted in more and more electricity cable appearing. Unsafe cable routes often emerge. Every year people die through electrocution. The electricity is available for only 2 hours a day. Diesel generators therefore hum all away or everywhere. These generators cost about $300 each month, including fuel, and thereby surpasses, for example, a teacher's salary. Here you can see the junction boxes. If they work, I don't know. Here you can see the generator. Often they share it because it's about $300 a month. It's too much money. As I mentioned, the laundry, it is lost if it falls down, and it gives a shadow, so you have always less light if there are clothes falling down. Here you can see the cable roofs in a narrow street. No light and very dangerous. That's typical pictures in Shatila. The high humidity. The houses were built with salty water, and here you can see the salt coming out. The wall plaster breaks through because of using the salt water for building. You can see the children. They are working. They are dreaming to become a ballerina. Happy even though they live in such a small room. This young boy lives with his 4 siblings in a very small room, but he is happy. Other children are hanging in the street playing soccer. The UNRWA provides 2 primary schools. Often do kids leave the school after the 6th grade. Many of them are working or dreaming or hanging in the street. Education and health provides are also very limited. The UNRWA is responsible for the Palestinian refugees, maintains only one health care in Shatila. The local chemist survives mostly through donations. The UNRWA provides 2 primary schools. A generation is growing up here that is denied any chance of life and whose only place to play in the street in the narrow gloomy alleys with their hanging ones weaving of cables. There is a high rate of violation, abuse and work by the children. They don't have playgrounds or football pitches. They are working instead of going to school. They have traumatic experience. About 6,000 children were reached by the PSX activities in 2021. It's a generation without any chance in life. The garbage kids. Kids collect the garbage before or instead of school because the garbage system collapsed in whole Lebanon and as well in the refugee camps. Working in Shatila. As I mentioned, academic jobs are not allowed and the payment is very bad, much more worse than the Lebanese worker, and the unemployment rate is very high. Here you have a bakery and someone who is collecting metal from the garbage. You can see 2 bakery. One project of hope. A basketball project for young girls. Mashti, the founder of this project, says, if you make the girls strong, the families will get strong too. For example, one of his former playing girls studied optometrical science, and we will run a common project in Shatila. So he gives the children in this camp a lot of hope. Here you can see that impressed me very much. Reading is dreaming with your eyes. Reading is dreaming with your eyes. That's what one kid wrote on the wall in Shatila refugee camp. Mashti is 50 years and he's living in the refugee camp. He is a project manager and he runs projects in this room to teach English, to teach art, and of course the Basket Beats Borders project. He told me about his home. Everyone has a homeland to live in. As a Palestinian, I live my homeland in my heart, and he's doing a lot for the Palestinian people. Surviving the Nakba. Due to the incompletely inadequate electricity supply, some interviews could only be carried out by the light of a smartphone. Mashti helped me. He works as a basketball trainer, as I mentioned, a project manager, and last but not least, as a translator. I was talking to Palestinians who left their homes in 1948. All of the interviewed people are older than 81 years. All of them survived the Nakba, some of them the massacre in 1982. You can see there was no electricity. The smartphone light had to help to write down everything. Living in Shatila, surviving the Nakba. They will never forget where they come from. Naimi al-Khatib. Naimi al-Khatib, 101 years old. My only memories are the picture on my smartphone. Here you can see she has pictures from the Nakba. I was born 1922 in Al-Khalsa and we escaped 1948 after the massacre in Deir Yassin to Idissi, Habush, and later to Tal al-Zatar. Here we were bombed and my mother, 2 brothers and my sister died. My father, 2 brothers and me went to Shatila. During the massacre in 1982, we were in Rusha, not in Shatila. We lost 14 members of our family. We stayed in Rusha in a house built by the UNRWA about 30 years ago. Al-Khala, our village, was occupied by the Israelis. The souk does still exist. Our houses were destroyed. We were not allowed to go back to Palestine. I don't have any relatives in Palestine. They all left it. I'm ready to leave everything here just to return. The Syrian refugees are now here. They can go back home, but we can't go back. We are refugees our whole life. Naimi al-Khatib, 101 years. Muhammad Ali, 83 years. I want to die in my home in Palestine and get buried there, where my fathers and my mothers were buried. I was born in Al-Khalil in Hebron and lived in Surif. My father was a worker at the salt factory at the Dead Sea. 1948, we escaped from Surif into the mountains. When the situation calmed again, we went back for 1 year. 1949, we left Surif by feet, and we went with my parent and my 8 brothers to a 2-day walk to Jerusalem. My sister was only 7 years old. From Jerusalem we went to Jordan and to Amman. The rest of our family was still in Palestine. In the 1970s we went to Lebanon to the Rashidi camp in the south. 1979 we went to Shatila. I married, got 4 children and worked as a butcher. At the massacre we left with my parents to Hamra and stayed there in a school. Later we went back to our house where we found 3 bodies. The neighbor thought it was me. I was afraid to stay there further, went back to Hamra and later back again to Shatila. I want to go back to Palestine. I want to die in my home and get buried there where my fathers and mothers were buried. I'm very sad and I want to go back. Muhammad Ali, 83 years. Hosnei Ghaslan, 86 years. I want to go back to my home, my beautiful garden. After the Deir al-Yassin massacre, we left Haifa. All the families in the community left it. My parents, 3 brothers and sisters, and me went by feet to Lebanon. Here we stayed in a camp in Balba. I married to Shatila and I got 10 children. I preserved the key of our home in Haifa. At the massacre I left Shatila at the 2nd day. My brother told me it was too dangerous there. The Israeli army was around the camp and one part was open. We fled through this part and went to another town in Lebanon for 3 days. When the Israeli army and the Phalanx were gone, we went back to Shatila. Not everyone went back. It was too dangerous, and we did not know what will happen in future. I have never been back to my home, my garden, my street, and I miss my beautiful garden. Hosnei Ghaslan, 86 years. Al-Sheikh Saleh Azuka, 81 years. If I can go now, I go directly. My father owned an ice factory in Wadi al-Savil, where we lived. 1948, my family, parents and 6 brothers and 6 sisters, went to Jenin by truck and later in a village at the border. The Jewish came directly to the village and said that we have to go. They stole our truck. Then they buried down our factory after stealing the material there. We went to Tripolis. It was a very long journey. Then we went to Sabra and later to Shatila. During the massacre I was outside. I studied Islamic science in Egypt and work as a prayer until now. I have got 8 children, 2 of them died. My village does still exist, my sisters are living there. I have never been again to Palestine. If I can go, I go directly. Ashir Azuka. Sophia Hassanin, 87 years old. We lived in Haifa. My father was an employee in a company. Drivers brought cars and we fled with my parents and 6 siblings to Al-Yazur. My father had a car and wanted to bring the sheep and a cow in the car to Al-Yazur and then to bring the other cows to Lebanon. The Israeli soldiers told him that they will shoot him when he comes again. So he lost his cows. Nobody came back, and so we don't know what happened to our house. At first we went to Ben Jebel in Lebanon. We were suffering for water and found a well for water. They took me into a rope and let me down to fill water from the well. I saw snakes and was shouting, but nobody was listening, and I never did this again. We were asked if we would stay in Lebanon or Syria because we have had a car. My father preferred to stay in Lebanon. I married in Shatila. During the massacre I was at home, hid myself in a shelter, waiting and went out of it to cook and went back into the shelter in the ground under the shelf. Here. At the second day were soldiers in the main road and all had to come out. I hid myself. The people outside saw blood in the street and went back to hide themselves. After the massacre, the Israeli soldiers told us to go to Sporting City in Beirut and to sing and shout, "Long live Sharon," Ariel Sharon, the later prime minister. When we went out, we saw the blood and bodies in the street, and we hid again. These were the interviews of the people in Shatila. Homeland. Leaving your home country takes a lot of courage. It makes up a large part of who we are. If our homeland dies, a part of us also dies. Refugees in Shatila camp. What will bring the future? There was a civil war in Lebanon from 1975 till 1990. There is still the economic crisis. And there is a Stop Solidaire campaign against corruption and privatization of downtown Beirut. Then came the uprising movement. Everything stopped because of the big blast in August 2020. The economic crisis continues. Then the bank crisis came and COVID-19. Big problems for this small country in Lebanon. Thank you for your interest. If you have any questions, you can write me. Here is my email address. Thank you for listening.